The Sierra Nevada is about to face something it hasn't seen in several years. Multiple winter storms, arriving one after another with barely time to breathe between them. Starting this weekend, the mountains will be buried under several feet of powder snow, and it won't stop for an entire week. What happens when the storms simply won't stop coming? Stay with me. In the next several minutes, we're going to track these storms from their birthplace in the Gulf of Alaska to their arrival in California's mountains, understand why they're lined up like planes waiting to land, and see what happens when nature decides an entire week belongs to winter. Most Sierra winters deliver storms with breathing room. A system rolls through, dumps snow, then moves on. The sky's clear, roads get ploughed, the mountains reset. Then another storm arrives days later. That rhythm, storm, pause, defines how winter works in these peaks. It's how mountain communities function. It's how travelers plan. It's how the snowpack builds in manageable layers. This week breaks that rhythm entirely. Meteorologists are watching a pattern develop that doesn't fit the normal script. Instead of isolated storms with recovery time between them, the Sierra faces a conveyor belt, one system after another. Each storm rolling in before the previous one's snow has been fully cleared from the roads, before the weight has been brushed off roofs, before the forest has settled under the new accumulation. If you've ever lived in or travelled through the Sierra Nevada during winter, you know what a single big storm can do. Roads close. Visibility drops to nothing. The landscape transforms into something remarkable. White, quiet, beautiful, and impressive. Now imagine that happening not once but repeatedly for 7 consecutive days. The storms don't pause, the snow continues falling, the mountains receive more accumulation. This isn't about a single dramatic event. This is about persistence, about nature showing what happens when the atmospheric machinery locks into place and refuses to shift. About watching the snowpack grow not in feet overnight, but in continuous accumulation that doesn't give the mountains, or the people in them, a chance to catch up. Here's what makes this pattern worth understanding. It's rare enough to notice, significant enough to matter, and unfolding right now. The first storm in this sequence arrives this weekend. By the time the pattern breaks, the Sierra Nevada may look noticeably different than at the start of the week. The snowpack will have jumped dramatically. Water managers will be recalculating reservoir forecasts, and anyone who experienced it will have a story about the week of continuous storms. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Are you in the mountains? Planning travel through the Sierra? Have you seen winters like this before? I want to know. And if you care about understanding weather patterns that actually shape landscapes and lives, subscribe, because we're going deeper into this story than the headlines ever will. Right now, the atmospheric stage is being set. Weather systems are forming in the Gulf of Alaska, lining up in sequence, all pointed at the same target, the Sierra Nevada. The jet stream, that river of fast-moving air high in the atmosphere, has positioned itself in a configuration that acts like a highway. Every storm that develops up north rides that highway south, and critically, the highway isn't moving. In a typical winter, the jet stream meanders. It shifts north, then south, then north again. That movement spreads storms around. California gets some. The Pacific Northwest gets others. The pattern stays dynamic, changeable, unpredictable beyond a few days. But sometimes, not often, but sometimes, the jet stream gets stuck. It locks into a position and stays there. When that happens, the weather becomes repetitive. Whatever pattern exists keeps repeating until something in the atmosphere shifts enough to break it. That's what's happening now. The jet stream has carved a path from Alaska to California and decided to stay put. Every storm forming in the Gulf of Alaska will follow that same path. They're not spreading out across different regions. They're all heading to the same mountains, one after another, like cars on a freeway during rush hour. Inevitable, steady, relentless. The National Weather Service has been tracking this development for days. As forecast models came into better agreement about what's coming, confidence grew. By midweek, meteorologists were calling it clearly: multiple storms, minimal breaks, sustained snow accumulation across the Sierra Nevada throughout the following week. That kind of forecast consistency days in advance is unusual. Weather prediction gets fuzzy beyond 3 or 4 days, but when the atmospheric pattern is this locked in place, the forecast becomes more reliable. The storms are coming. The only questions are exact timing and precise totals, details that matter locally but don't change the broader story. This weekend marks the beginning. The first system approaches late Sunday, bringing snow that will start accumulating across the higher elevations. But it's not a standalone event, it's the opening act of a much longer performance. So what makes this week different from the dozens of other winter storms that hit these mountains every year? That's where we need to go next, into understanding why breaks between storms matter, and what happens when those breaks disappear. Think about waves hitting a beach during a normal day. A wave crashes, spreads across the sand, then retreats. There's a pause. The beach absorbs the water, the sand settles. Then another wave arrives. That rhythm allows the shoreline to handle the ocean's energy in manageable doses. But during a sustained storm, the waves don't pause. They keep hammering the shore without relief. Each wave builds on the previous one. The beach never gets a chance to recover. The cumulative effect becomes something entirely different than individual waves could create alone. That's what's about to happen in the Sierra Nevada, but with snow instead of water. In a typical Sierra winter, storms arrive with breathing room. A system drops significant snow, maybe 1 to 2 feet in the higher elevations. Winds howl, visibility drops, travel becomes difficult or impossible. Then the storm moves on. Within hours or a day, skies begin clearing. Temperatures might even warm slightly. Caltrans crews get the major highways cleared. Mountain communities dig out. Ski resorts groom their slopes. The forest settles under its new white blanket. Life in the mountains adjusts, adapts, continues. Then, a few days later, another storm arrives. The cycle repeats. But critically, those days between storms allow the mountains to absorb each event as a separate occurrence. Road crews can work without snow actively falling. Travelers can time their trips during the clear windows. Roofs can be cleared before the next load arrives. The snowpack builds in distinct layers, storm snow, then a settling period, then more storm snow. That layering creates structure. Remove those breaks, and everything changes. When storms arrive back to back without significant pauses, the snow becomes continuous. Roads that were just cleared get buried again before the plows have finished their routes. Crews can't keep up because they're fighting accumulation that never stops. Travelers lose those safe windows to move through the mountains. The snowpack doesn't get time to settle and stabilize between additions. Instead of distinct layers, it becomes a thick, continuous accumulation that grows deeper by the hour. The phrase parade of storms gets used often in meteorology, sometimes too casually, but it captures something real when it actually happens. Imagine standing on a street watching a parade. First comes a marching band. They pass. There's a gap. You can cross the street, talk to friends, buy a snack. Then comes the next float. It passes. Another gap. More time to move around. That's a normal winter storm pattern. Events with spaces between them. Now imagine a parade where the marching band is followed immediately by the float, which is followed immediately by the next band, which is followed immediately by the next float, with 0 gaps. You can't cross the street. You can't pause. The parade just keeps coming. That's this week in the Sierra Nevada. Storm, 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 storm. No gaps to cross the street. What makes this pattern particularly notable is the temperature profile. These storms are cold. The snow falling will be light, dry powder, the kind skiers dream about. When snow falls cold and dry, it stacks high. It's fluffy. It piles up dramatically. 1 foot of powder snow might contain the same water content as 6 inches of heavy, wet Sierra cement. But that 1 foot takes up more space. It buries things more completely. It creates those stunning visual transformations where fences disappear and cars become vague mounds. If these were warm, wet storms, the snow would be heavier and denser. It wouldn't accumulate as dramatically in terms of depth. But the cold air feeding these systems means the mountains will see impressive accumulation, the kind that transforms the landscape visibly, rapidly, and continuously. Anyone who's spent significant time in the Sierra Nevada during winter knows the difference between a big storm and a sustained pattern. A big storm is an event. You prepare, you hunker down, you wait it out, you recover. A sustained pattern is different. It's not one event but a condition that persists. You're not waiting out a storm. You're living in snow that won't stop falling. The psychology changes, the logistics change, the experience changes. Long-time residents remember winters when this happened. Maybe not this exact pattern, but similar stretches where the snow just kept coming. Those weeks become touchstones, stories told years later. Remember the winter when the snow never stopped? Those are the winters that define a place's relationship with weather. They're rare enough to stand out, significant enough to reshape the landscape temporarily, and memorable enough to last in collective memory. This is one of those weeks. The forecast models, the sophisticated computer simulations that meteorologists use to predict weather, have been remarkably consistent. That's unusual for a multi-day forecast. Typically, models disagree about timing, intensity, and exact track of systems more than a few days out. But when the atmospheric pattern is strongly established, when the jet stream is locked in place, when the storm track is clear, the models converge. They're all showing the same story, system after system, minimal breaks, sustained snow accumulation. That consistency gives confidence. This isn't a marginal forecast where conditions might or might not materialize. The pattern is clear. The storms are coming. The only uncertainties are the precise details, exactly when each system arrives, exactly which elevations see the most snow, exactly how much falls in any specific location. Those details matter enormously if you're planning travel or managing operations in the mountains, but they don't change the fundamental story. For those living outside the Sierra Nevada, particularly in the valleys and coastal areas of California, this week won't directly affect daily life. These storms are targeting the mountains specifically. The Central Valley might see rain. The coast might get wind and clouds, but the dramatic snow, the sustained accumulation, the relentless pattern, that's focused on the peaks. It's a mountain story, not a statewide event, but it's a mountain story with statewide implications we'll explore later, particularly regarding water. First, though, we need to understand where these storms are born, why they're all following the same path, and what's keeping this pattern locked in place. Because the answer isn't in California, it's 2,000 miles north, in cold waters most people never think about. There's a place in the North Pacific Ocean where weather systems grow from disturbances into full-fledged storms. The Gulf of Alaska sits like a vast atmospheric nursery, where cold air from the Arctic meets relatively warmer ocean water, and the contrast creates energy. Lots of energy. That energy becomes wind, moisture, movement, all the ingredients storms need to develop and intensify. Most West Coast winter storms trace their origins to this region. It's the birthplace of the weather that eventually crosses the coastline and moves inland. In a normal pattern, storms form in the Gulf of Alaska, then spread out as they move southeast. Some head toward British Columbia, others track into Washington or Oregon, some curve south toward California. The jet stream, that high-altitude river of fast-moving air, guides each system along slightly different paths. The storms scatter across the Pacific Northwest and down the coast. But right now, the jet stream isn't scattering anything. It's acting like a conveyor belt with a single destination. Imagine a highway system where every on-ramp leads to the same freeway. And that freeway has exactly one exit, the Sierra Nevada. That's the current configuration. The jet stream has positioned itself in what meteorologists call a persistent trough pattern. Picture a giant dip or valley in the jet stream's normally wavy path. That dip is sitting right over the Gulf of Alaska, and it's extending south toward California. When storms form in that dip, they ride its curve like a marble rolling along a groove. The jet stream guides them along the same path storm after storm. They're not spreading out because the guide path isn't changing. It's locked in place. And as long as it stays locked, every new disturbance that develops up north will follow the same route south. This is why the forecasters can predict with unusual confidence what's coming all week. They're not trying to guess where random storms might go. They're watching a pattern that's stable and repetitive. The atmospheric machinery has organized itself into a configuration, and that configuration is pointed directly at California's mountains. The cold air feeding these storms matters enormously. Arctic air masses have been spilling south into Alaska, keeping temperatures well below freezing. When those air masses interact with the Gulf of Alaska's waters, they create strong temperature contrasts. That contrast generates storm energy, but the cold air also means any precipitation falling in the mountains will be snow, light, dry, fluffy snow that accumulates dramatically. If the air masses feeding these storms were warmer, the snowline in the Sierra would be higher. Lower elevations might see rain instead. The snow that did fall might be heavier and wetter, but the cold pattern means the snowline drops lower and the snow that falls stays light. That's ideal for creating deep powder accumulation, the kind that buries landscapes quickly and completely. Think of the jet stream as a highway in the sky. Most of the time, that highway curves and meanders. It shifts north, then south, then north again. Exits appear in different places. Traffic spreads out across multiple routes, but occasionally the highway straightens out and stays locked in position. All the traffic follows the same route. That's what's happening now. The highway runs from Alaska to California, and it's not moving. This kind of pattern doesn't last forever. Eventually, something in the broader atmospheric circulation shifts. A ridge of high pressure might build. A different weather system might disrupt the flow. The jet stream will start meandering again, and the storm track will change. But while the pattern persists, it's remarkably consistent. Storm after storm, same path, same target. The Gulf of Alaska is earning its reputation this week as the Pacific Storm Factory. Weather systems are developing there every day or two, gaining strength from the temperature contrasts and the energy available, then sliding southeast along the jet stream highway. By the time they approach the west coast, they've organized into coherent storm systems carrying substantial moisture. When those moisture-laden systems hit the Sierra Nevada, the mountains force the air upward. As air rises, it cools. As it cools, the moisture condenses and falls as snow. The higher the mountains, the more lifting occurs, and the more snow falls. This process, called orographic lift, is why mountains are so efficient at wringing moisture from storms. The Sierra Nevada acts like a giant wall, forcing every passing storm to surrender its moisture as snow across the peaks. This week, that process repeats over and over. Each storm arrives, hits the mountain wall, dumps its moisture as snow, then moves on. Before the snow from one system has stopped falling, the next system is already approaching. The mountains don't get a break. The orographic lift keeps happening. The snow keeps accumulating. Nature has a way of organizing itself into patterns that seem almost intentional. There's no consciousness behind it, no plan, but the physics creates outcomes that can feel orchestrated. Right now, the atmosphere has arranged itself to deliver storm after storm to the same location. It's not random. It's the result of specific conditions, jet stream position, temperature contrasts, pressure patterns, all aligning in a particular configuration. Understanding where these storms come from and why they're all following the same path helps make sense of what's about to unfold. This isn't a freak occurrence or a surprise ambush. It's the predictable outcome of an atmospheric pattern that meteorologists can see developing days in advance. The Gulf of Alaska is generating storms. The jet stream is guiding them toward California. The Sierra Nevada is positioned to catch every single one. If the jet stream shifted even slightly north, these storms might track into Oregon or Washington instead. If it shifted south, they might miss the Sierra entirely or come in weaker, but it's positioned exactly where it needs to be to deliver system after system directly to California's mountains, and it's staying there. That persistence, that locked-in quality, is what makes this week unusual. Patterns this stable over multiple days are uncommon. When they do occur, they create memorable weather events. This is one of those times. The machinery is in motion, the storms are forming where they need to form, travelling where they need to travel, and aiming where they need to aim. The first one approaches this weekend. The rest follow in sequence throughout the week. Each one brings more snow. Each one adds to the accumulation. Each one reinforces the pattern. Now that we understand where these storms are born and why they're all heading to the same place, the next question becomes obvious. When exactly do they arrive? And what does the timeline look like as this week unfolds? This weekend marks the beginning, not with a single dramatic strike, but with the first system in a sequence that won't relent for days. Late Sunday, as the sun sets behind the Sierra Peaks, the initial storm approaches from the northwest. Snow begins falling across the higher elevations, light at first, then steadier as the system moves overhead. By Monday morning, the mountains wake to fresh accumulation and snow that's still falling. But Monday doesn't bring a conclusion, it brings continuation. As the first system moves through, the second one is already visible on satellite imagery, tracking along the same path. There's barely time for the snow to pause before the next wave arrives. Monday into Tuesday sees more snow. Tuesday into Wednesday sees more snow. The pattern repeats with such consistency that trying to separate individual storms becomes almost meaningless. Where does one system end and the next begin when they're lined up so closely? For anyone watching forecasts or planning around weather, this creates an unusual situation. Normally, you can point to a storm's arrival and departure, a clear beginning and end. This week blurs those boundaries. The snow falls Sunday. It's still falling Monday. It's still falling Tuesday. By Wednesday, the question isn't when will it start, but when will it stop? The midweek period, Wednesday through Friday, represents the heart of this pattern. multiple systems moving through in close succession, snow accumulating steadily, relentlessly, without significant breaks. This is when the cumulative effect becomes most apparent. Roads that were ploughed hours earlier get buried again. Accumulation totals that seemed manageable on Sunday start looking substantial by Wednesday. The landscape continues its transformation under continuous snow. By Thursday and Friday, the Sierra Nevada is deep in this pattern. The snowpack has grown significantly. The mountains look different than they did at the start of the week. Fresh snow covers everything, multiple feet deep in many locations, still falling, still accumulating. The following weekend brings the possibility of this pattern finally weakening. Storms may continue, but the relentless parade might space out slightly. The jet stream pattern that held so steady might finally begin shifting. Yeah, but that's looking ahead to the pattern's end, something that won't arrive until after the week of sustained snow has already done its work. Elevation matters enormously throughout this timeline. The highest peaks, those above 8,000 feet, see snow first and see it most. Mid-elevations, where many ski resorts and mountain communities sit, experience heavy accumulation throughout the week. Lower elevations in the mountains see variation, sometimes snow, sometimes rain, depending on each system's exact temperature profile. Interstate 80, the major highway crossing the Sierra, runs through elevations where snow dominates this pattern. Donner Pass, at over 7,000 feet, sits squarely in the bullseye. This is where the impact on travel becomes most significant. When snow falls continuously across that elevation for days, keeping the highway open becomes an enormous challenge, sometimes an impossible one. Timing carries uncertainty beyond a few days, as all weather forecasts do. A system might arrive a few hours earlier or later than predicted. Intensities might vary from what models show. Specific locations might see more or less snow than broader forecasts suggest. These details matter greatly to anyone directly affected, but they don't change the fundamental story. Multiple storms, minimal breaks, sustained snow accumulation across the Sierra Nevada throughout the week. For those planning travel through or to the mountains, this timeline presents clear challenges. The window of opportunity closes Sunday and doesn't reopen until potentially the following weekend. Anyone who needs to cross the Sierra or visit mountain areas faces a choice. Travel before the pattern begins or wait until after it ends. Trying to navigate through the middle of it means dealing with continuous snow, road closures, chain requirements, reduced visibility, and conditions that change faster than road crews can keep up. Mountain communities prepare differently for sustained patterns than for single storms. When you know the snow will keep falling for days, preparation intensifies. Stock up on supplies before it starts. Clear roofs between storms if there are brief breaks. Ensure backup plans for power, heat, and communication. Arrange travel and obligations to avoid needing to go anywhere until it's over. The timeline also matters for those downstream from the mountains, though in a completely different way. This is snow that will eventually become water. Every storm that passes through the Sierra this week deposits moisture that gets locked in the snowpack. Weeks or months from now, as temperatures warm and that snow melts, it becomes stream flow that fills reservoirs, waters crops, and supplies cities. But that's a future story. For this week, the focus is on the snow itself, and what it means in the immediate term. Weather doesn't respect our desire for convenient timing. This pattern arrives when it arrives because atmospheric conditions aligned in a particular way at a particular time. It's not intentional, it's not scheduled, it's the outcome of physics playing out across thousands of miles of ocean and atmosphere, resulting in a specific forecast for a specific week. By the time Sunday evening arrives and snow begins falling across the high country, the pattern that meteorologists have been watching for days becomes reality. The storms are no longer approaching, they're arriving, and once the first one moves through, there's no pause before the next one follows. What several feet of snow actually means, how it transforms landscapes, affects communities, and changes how life works in the mountains temporarily, requires understanding beyond just timeline and totals. It's one thing to know snow is coming continuously for a week. It's another to grasp what that creates when it actually happens. Imagine standing in your yard and watching snow fall. After an hour, there's an inch on the ground. After 3 hours, 3 inches. After 6 hours, half a foot. You can measure the accumulation in real time. You can see the ground disappearing, the grass vanishing under white, objects start becoming obscured, a lawn chair becomes a mound, a fence post becomes a white-topped pillar. Now extend that process over not hours but days, Snow falls, stops briefly, starts again, falls harder, lightens, intensifies again, never truly stops for long. Each time you look outside, the white has gotten deeper. What started as inches becomes feet, plural. That's what several feet of snow means in practical terms. It's not an instantaneous burial. It's a gradual but relentless accumulation that transforms everything it touches. In the Sierra Nevada this week, the higher elevations will experience exactly that. Snow will begin falling Sunday and continue with only brief pauses through the end of the week. During that time, the accumulation builds. 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet. In some locations, particularly at the highest elevations where storms deposit their heaviest snow, even more. That's not a single dump from one massive storm. It's the cumulative result of multiple systems passing through, each adding another layer, another load, another foot or two to what's already there. Powder snow, light, dry, fluffy snow, stacks differently than heavy snow. When snow falls cold, it has more airspace between the individual flakes. It's less dense. The same amount of water content spreads across more vertical space. 1 foot of heavy wet snow might contain the same water as 2 or 3 feet of powder, but those 3 feet take up much more space. They bury things more completely, they create deeper drifts, they pile higher on every surface. The storms coming this week carry that cold signature. The snow falling will be powder, the kind that blows easily in wind, that creates those stunning rooster tails behind skiers that squeaks underfoot when you walk across it. It's beautiful snow. It's desirable snow for recreational purposes, but it's also snow that accumulates dramatically and piles high. When several feet of powder snow falls across forested mountains, the landscape transforms into something otherworldly. Tree branches that were visible become weighted down with white. Some branches bend gracefully under the load, others snap with sharp cracks that echo through the forest. Smaller trees disappear entirely, buried under drifts that form around their trunks. Open meadows become featureless bowls of white, impossible to distinguish from the surrounding terrain. Roads become the front line of the battle between accumulation and human effort to keep transportation routes open. Every hour of continuous snowfall deposits more snow on the pavement. Plows run continuously, pushing snow to the sides, creating walls that grow taller as the week progresses. But when snow is falling as fast or faster than plows can clear it, the battle becomes impossible to win. Roads get closed not because the equipment isn't working or the crews aren't trying, but because the accumulation overwhelms the capacity to keep up. Longtime residents of Sierra Nevada mountain communities have seen this before, even if not recently. There are winters that stand out in memory. The winters when the snow just wouldn't stop. When you'd clear your driveway in the morning, work for an hour moving heavy white powder, and by evening it would be full again. When stepping outside required plunging into snow that reached mid-thigh or higher. When looking out, the window showed a world reduced to white and grey, where distances became impossible to judge and familiar landmarks disappeared. Those memorable winters create a reference point. People talk about them years later. Remember when we got buried for that whole week? This will be one of those reference points. In future years, when significant snow patterns develop, people may compare them to this week. Is this going to be like that time when the storms wouldn't stop? The difference between manageable snow and overwhelming snow often comes down to duration rather than intensity. A single storm that drops 3 feet of snow is significant. It requires attention and effort to deal with. But it's a contained event with a clear beginning and end. You prepare, endure it, then recover. But when 3 feet falls over a week, from multiple storms without breaks, the dynamic changes. You're not recovering from one event. You're managing an ongoing condition. There's no single after the storm moment because the next storm is already arriving. Buildings handle continuous snow loads differently than single events. Most mountain structures are engineered for significant snow weight. Roofs are built with steep pitches to shed snow. Materials are chosen for strength and durability. But even robust structures have limits. As snow piles deeper through the week, weight accumulates. Property owners watch their roofs during sustained patterns, sometimes needing to clear them between storms to prevent dangerous loads from building up. The Sierra Nevada has absorbed these patterns before. The mountains themselves are indifferent to snow. They've stood through countless winters, some with enormous snow years, others relatively dry. The forests adapt. The wildlife adapts. The geology remains unchanged regardless of how much frozen water temporarily blankets the slopes. But the human infrastructure in the mountains, the roads, buildings, power lines, communities, requires active management when accumulation becomes substantial and sustained. Ski resorts face a paradox during weeks like this. Snow is what they need. Deep powder is what skiers travel from around the world to experience. More snow means better conditions, fuller coverage, longer seasons. But too much snow falling too fast creates operational challenges. Lifts need to run safely. Avalanche control work intensifies. Access roads need to stay open for employees and guests. The resort needs to balance the blessing of abundant snow with the practical realities of operating in it. For anyone not in the mountains, it's easy to look at forecast totals and see them as abstract numbers. 3 feet, 5 feet, 7 feet in some locations. They're just numbers until you've experienced what they represent physically, until you've seen how chest-deep snow changes movement from walking to swimming through powder, until you've felt the workout of shoveling when every scoop weighs more than expected, and there's still more snow falling to replace what you just moved, until you've experienced the quiet that deep snow brings, how it muffles sound, softens the world, creates a sense of isolation even if you're not alone. This week will create that experience for those in the Sierra. The snow will be measured not in inches but in feet. The accumulation will be visible, tangible, transformative, and it won't happen from one massive event, but from the steady persistence of storm after storm adding layer upon layer. The practical implications of this much snow falling over this duration extend beyond just the mountains themselves. They affect travel, communities, daily life, and decisions people need to make about when to move, when to stay put, and how to prepare for conditions that don't offer easy windows of opportunity. Interstate 80 carves through the Sierra Nevada at Donner Pass, connecting California's Central Valley with Nevada and points east. It's the primary highway crossing these mountains during winter. It's also one of the most challenging major highways in America to keep open. When storms hit hard and sustained, that challenge becomes enormous. This week presents exactly that scenario. Continuous snow falling across the pass elevations, accumulation happening faster than crews can fully manage, road conditions deteriorating as fast as they're improved. For anyone planning to travel this route, whether for work, family or necessity, the practical reality becomes clear. The window closes Sunday and might not reopen reliably until the following weekend. Road closures during Sierra storms aren't failures of maintenance or preparation, they're acknowledgements of reality. When snow is falling at rates of 2 or 3 inches per hour, accumulating on roads faster than plows can clear them, visibility drops to nearly zero. And more storms are already approaching behind the current one. Closing the road becomes the only safe option. Trying to keep it open would put travellers and road crews at risk for conditions that can't be adequately managed. Chain requirements go into effect during active snowfall on mountain highways. For those unfamiliar with driving in snow, even with chains, the experience is stressful and slow. Traction is limited. Stopping distances extend dramatically. Visibility through blowing snow makes seeing the road ahead difficult. Other drivers with varying skill levels share the same narrow path. During sustained storms, even experienced mountain drivers recognize when conditions exceed what's reasonable to navigate. For mountain communities, the towns and small cities that sit in the Sierra Nevada rather than just passing through, sustained snow patterns are part of life, but that doesn't make them easy. Preparation intensifies when forecasts show a week of continuous storms ahead. Stock up on food before it starts, make sure prescriptions are filled, ensure backup heating sources work, confirm that supplies of any necessities are adequate to last through a week without easy access to stores. Power outages can happen when heavy snow accumulates on power lines, or tree branches break under the weight and take down wires. Most mountain communities have experience with this and maintain generators or alternative heating sources, but it's another factor in the practical calculus of living through sustained storms. Cell service can become unreliable if towers lose power or get overwhelmed by usage. Communication plans matter. The rhythm of daily life adjusts during these weeks. Instead of going out when needed, you go out when possible, during the brief clear windows if they appear, or not at all if they don't. Instead of running errands across multiple days, you consolidate everything into one trip before the pattern begins. Instead of assuming travel is always an option, you accept that sometimes staying home is the only reasonable choice. For those who work in mountain communities, at ski resorts, hotels, restaurants, shops, Sustained storms create challenges around simply getting to work. Even if the business is operating, getting there through continuous snow might not be possible. Employers and employees adapt with flexible arrangements. Overnight accommodations or temporary closures until conditions improve. Ski resorts during this week face that operational paradox. The snow they're receiving is exactly what they want. Deep powder, cold temperatures, excellent conditions. But operating safely in continuous storms requires constant vigilance. Avalanche control work happens daily, often before dawn, to ensure slopes are safe before opening. Lift operations require checking and clearing snow from equipment repeatedly. Parking lots need continuous ploughing. Access roads need to stay open. For skiers and snowboarders, the decision becomes whether to travel to the mountains during this pattern or wait until after. Some will go specifically because of the snow, accepting the challenges of travel and conditions for the reward of fresh powder. Others will wait until the storms pass and conditions stabilize. There's no single right answer, only individual risk assessment and preference. One crucial point deserves clarity. Preparation is not panic. Understanding what's coming and adjusting accordingly is not the same as fearing it or assuming disaster. Mountain communities have handled sustained storms before. The infrastructure exists to manage these situations. The experience exists to know what works. Information exists to make informed decisions. The difference between being prepared and being scared is information. Knowing a week of sustained snow is coming allows for planning. Knowing which roads might close allows for alternate arrangements. Knowing stores might be hard to access allows for shopping ahead. That's empowerment through information, not fear through warning. Either for those in the Central Valley or along California's coast, this pattern's direct impacts are minimal. Some rain, some wind, cloudy skies, but nothing like what the mountains will experience. The snow is concentrated at elevation. It's a mountain event, not a statewide crisis. Life continues normally for most of California's population, while the Sierra Nevada absorbs storm after storm. However, there's an indirect connection everyone in California shares with this pattern. Water. Every inch of snow falling this week is frozen water that will eventually melt. That snowpack becomes stream flow. That stream flow fills reservoirs. Those reservoirs supply cities, farms, and ecosystems throughout California. A strong snow year in the Sierra Nevada means more water availability months later. This week contributes directly to that snowpack, thus potentially significantly. But that's future implications. For the immediate practical concerns of this week, the focus remains on the storms themselves and managing life during them. Weather forecasts carry inherent uncertainty, especially over multiple days. Timing can shift by hours. Snow amounts can vary by location and elevation. Individual storm intensities might be stronger or weaker than predicted. Any specific forecast for a specific location should be verified with official sources, the National Weather Service, local emergency management, transportation departments, as the week progresses. Conditions can change. Forecasts get updated as new information arrives. Anyone directly affected should stay informed through reliable sources rather than relying on any single forecast made days in advance. That disclaimer isn't hedging. It's honesty about how weather prediction works. The broad pattern is clear and well forecasted. The specifics contain uncertainty that only resolves as events unfold. For travelers with plans through the Sierra this week, the practical advice is straightforward. Consider changing timing if possible. Travel before the pattern begins or after it ends. If travel during the storms is necessary, prepare for delays, possible closures, and challenging conditions. Monitor official highway information, carry emergency supplies, have backup plans. For those living in the mountains, the practical approach is equally clear. Prepare for sustained snow, limited travel, and a week where going outside means dealing with continuous winter conditions. Make sure everything needed is available before it starts. Plan for staying home more than usual. Accept that this week belongs to winter, and the mountains set the rules. The balance between respecting nature's power and living confidently in mountain environments comes from information, experience, and appropriate preparation. Not from fear or panic, but from understanding what's coming and adjusting accordingly. This brings us to the larger question. Why is this pattern developing now? What does it mean beyond just this week? And how does this fit into the broader story of Sierra Nevada winters and California's water future? Step back from the immediate forecast, from the specific timing and snow totals and road conditions, and a larger pattern becomes visible. This week isn't happening in isolation. It's the result of atmospheric conditions that developed over time, influenced by factors playing out across thousands of miles of ocean and sky. The jet stream configuration driving these storms didn't appear randomly. It emerged from the interaction of pressure systems, temperature gradients, and the chaotic but physics-governed dance of global weather patterns. High pressure built in certain regions, low pressure developed in others. The jet stream responded by carving a path that happens to run directly from the Gulf of Alaska to California's mountains. That path could have been different. If pressure patterns had arranged themselves slightly differently, storms might be hitting the Pacific Northwest instead, or missing the West Coast entirely, or scattered across multiple regions rather than concentrated on one target. But the pattern arranged itself this way, and once established, it's stable enough to persist for days. That persistence creates the sustained storm sequence California's Sierra Nevada is about to experience. Winter weather in the mountains is inherently variable. Some years bring enormous snowfall, others are dry. Some winters front-load their snow early in the season, others deliver most of their snow late. Individual months can be incredibly active or remarkably quiet. That variability is normal. It's how mountain climates work. Any given week might be stormy or clear, not because of trend or pattern, but because of the specific atmospheric conditions present at that moment. This week falls into the stormy category, exceptionally so. The pattern is strong, clear, and well forecasted. But it's 1 week in one winter. It doesn't represent a trend or a new normal. It's an event, significant while it lasts, memorable when it's over, but still an event within the normal range of winter variability these mountains experience. What makes it worth paying attention to is the combination of factors: multiple storms, minimal breaks, sustained accumulation, and the clear atmospheric setup that allows forecasters to see it coming days in advance. Those factors together create something less common than typical winter storms, but not unprecedented or outside the bounds of what Sierra winters can deliver. For California water managers, this week represents good news. The Sierra Nevada functions as the state's natural water storage system. Snow that falls during winter gets locked in the high country snowpack. As spring arrives and temperatures warm, that snow melts gradually, feeding streams that flow into reservoirs throughout the spring and summer. Those reservoirs then supply water to cities, agriculture, and ecosystems across California throughout the year. A strong snow year means more water available. A weak snow year creates challenges. Water managers watch the snowpack closely, measuring it regularly, calculating how much water it contains, and projecting what that means for water supply months ahead. This week's storms deposit substantial moisture into that snowpack. Every storm that passes through adds water that will eventually become stream flow. In a state where water management is perpetually critical, that matters. The snowpack acts like a savings account. Winter is when deposits happen. Spring and summer are when withdrawals occur, but naturally through melting rather than through human action. The size of the account at winter's end determines what's available throughout the rest of the year. Weeks like this one make deposits into that account, but here's important context. One good week doesn't define a water year. What matters is the cumulative snowfall across the entire winter season. This week contributes, potentially significantly. But the total snowpack at winter's end depends on what happens in the weeks and months before and after this pattern. A strong week in the middle of an otherwise average winter still results in an average water year. A strong week in the middle of an already good winter makes that good winter even better. The full picture won't be clear until spring, when the final snowpack measurements are taken and water managers can calculate total storage. For now, this week represents a positive contribution to California's water future, but one piece of a larger puzzle that takes months to complete. There's something humbling about watching atmospheric patterns organize themselves into configurations like this. No human agency is involved. No one decided these storms should line up and target the Sierra Nevada. The physics of the atmosphere, temperature contrasts, pressure gradients, planetary scale circulation patterns, created conditions that resulted in this specific outcome. It's a reminder of scale, of the vast systems operating beyond human control or influence, of nature's indifference to our schedules, preferences, or convenience. The mountains will absorb these storms the way they've absorbed countless others across millennia. Snow will fall, it will pile high, eventually it will melt. The mountains themselves remain unchanged. They've stood through ice ages and warm periods, through wet cycles and droughts, through winters that buried them under extraordinary snow and winters that barely whitened their peaks. This week is one more entry in that long ledger of weather events the Sierra Nevada has experienced and will continue experiencing long after we're gone. For the people living in and around these mountains, the relationship with winter weather is more immediate and personal. These storms aren't abstract atmospheric phenomena, they're real conditions requiring real responses. Road closures affect travel plans, snow accumulation affects daily routines, power outages affect comfort and safety. The bigger picture matters, but so does the immediate experience of living through sustained snow. That balance between appreciating nature's scale and dealing with its immediate impacts defines mountain life during winter. You can simultaneously respect the power and beauty of a sustained storm pattern, while also cursing the driveway that needs clearing for the third time today. You can understand the importance of snow for water supply while also wishing for a day of sunshine and clear roads. Those perspectives aren't contradictory, they're both real. When will this pattern break? Forecasts suggest the sustained sequence might begin loosening by the following weekend. The storms might space out more, the jet stream might begin shifting position, but weather forecasting gets increasingly uncertain the further out you look. What's clear is that this week, starting Sunday and continuing through the following days, represents the core of this pattern. What happens after depends on how atmospheric conditions evolve, something that becomes clearer as the week progresses. For now, the story is the storms themselves, their origin in the Gulf of Alaska, their guided path along the jet stream, their repeated arrival across the Sierra Nevada, their cumulative snow accumulation, the practical implications for travel and mountain life, the larger significance for California water, all of it connected through the physics of weather and the geography of mountains positioned to catch moisture from Pacific storms. This is what makes weather endlessly fascinating to those who pay attention. It's never exactly the same twice. Patterns repeat but with variations. Forecasts improve but retain uncertainty. Our understanding grows but nature remains ultimately unpredictable beyond a certain point. We can see this pattern coming, understand why it's forming, predict its general behavior, and still know that specific details will only reveal themselves as events unfold. For those watching this pattern with interest, whether from the mountains themselves, from elsewhere in California, or from distant locations with curiosity about weather, the coming week offers a real-time example of atmospheric behavior in action. This isn't theoretical meteorology, it's actual storms, actual snow, actual impacts, all unfolding according to physical processes we can understand and forecast but not control. The Sierra Nevada has a saying, at least among those who spend significant time there, the mountains endure these conditions naturally. It means nature sets the rules. Weather happens on its schedule, not ours. Snow falls where and when atmospheric conditions dictate. Our role is to adapt, prepare, and respect the power of the environment rather than assuming we can dominate or ignore it. This week exemplifies that relationship. The storms are coming because conditions created them. The snow will fall because the atmosphere is delivering moisture to mountains cold enough to freeze it. Roads will close if accumulation overwhelms capacity to manage them. The pattern will break when larger atmospheric conditions shift. All of it happens according to nature's physics, not human preference. And yet, within that reality, there's agency. Information allows preparation. Understanding allows appropriate response. Knowledge allows distinction between real risk and imagined fear. We can't control the weather, but we can control how we respond to it. That's the empowerment available through accurate information and measured perspective. As this pattern develops over the coming days, those in the mountains will experience it directly. Those following along from elsewhere will watch it unfold through forecasts, reports, and updates. Everyone shares the experience of witnessing what happens when the atmosphere organizes itself into a sustained pattern, and the Sierra Nevada receives storm after storm without relief. Years from now, this week might be remembered as one of those notable winter patterns, the time when the storms wouldn't stop. Or it might fade into the background of many winter weather events the mountains experience. Either way, it represents something real, something measurable, something that matters to water supply and mountain communities, and anyone with connections to the Sierra Nevada during this particular week. Thank you for staying with me through this deep look at what's coming. If you found this valuable, if understanding the why and how behind the weather makes you more informed, subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and whether you've experienced Sierra winters like this before. I want to know your stories, your perspective, your connections to these mountains and this weather. And if you're in the mountains or planning travel, stay informed through official sources as this pattern unfolds. Monitor the National Weather Service, check Caltrans for highway conditions, follow local emergency management. Conditions will evolve, and staying current matters. The mountains are about to remind us what sustained winter weather looks like. Stay safe, stay informed, and respect the power of nature when it decides to deliver storm after storm without pause. We'll keep watching, we'll keep learning, and we'll keep understanding the weather that shapes these remarkable mountains.